What would you do if your neighbor's kid spray painted your garage, then said, "You can't do anything. My mom runs the HOA. I caught him in the act, and justice came fast." It was supposed to be a regular weekend morning. I grabbed my coffee, stepped outside to get some fresh air, and planned to start the day with a few chores. What I didn't expect was to find my garage completely defaced, covered in ugly, bright-colored spray paint. I stood there, stunned, staring at the mess someone had made of my property. At first, I thought maybe it was a random act of vandalism, some teenager running wild during the night, targeting homes in the neighborhood. But as I looked closer, I realized the damage was specific. It wasn't just random graffiti. There were words and symbols clearly meant for me. This wasn't a coincidence. It was personal. I started scanning the area, checking the security cameras I had recently installed. I couldn't believe what I saw in the footage. My neighbor's son, yes, Karen's kid, spray can in hand, laughing as he defaced my garage, like it was some kind of joke. He didn't even try to hide his face. In fact, he looked straight at the camera and smiled. It was like he wanted me to know it was him. This wasn't just property damage. It was bold, intentional, and downright disrespectful. And let me be clear, this wasn't just any kid. This was the son of the infamous HOA Karen in our neighborhood. You know the type. The self-appointed ruler of the block. The one who issues petty warnings about your grass being half an inch too long or your trash bins being brought in 5 minutes late. Her sense of entitlement is legendary, but even knowing how controlling and entitled she is, I was shocked that her son would take it this far. Destroying someone's property? That's criminal. And to do it in broad daylight, right in front of security cameras? That takes a level of arrogance that's hard to believe. As I replayed the footage over and over, my frustration turned to anger. This wasn't just about a vandalized garage. It was about an entitled family who thought they were above the rules. It was about the double standard in our community, where some people feel like they can do whatever they want because they hold some kind of imaginary power through the HOA. I walked around the side of my house, trying to assess the full extent of the damage. Spray paint was all over the garage door, the driveway, even part of the brick siding. It was going to take hours and a lot of money to clean up this mess. And for what? Because some spoiled teenager wanted to flex his mother's so-called authority? At that moment, I knew I couldn't just let it slide. This wasn't some harmless prank. This was targeted vandalism, pure and simple. I took photos of everything, made backups of the security footage, and began documenting the damage, in case legal action was needed. I knew this would turn into something bigger. The audacity of vandalizing someone's property and thinking there would be no consequences just because your mom runs the HOA, that's next-level entitlement. And as angry as I was also determined to make sure this kind of behavior didn't go unpunished. No one should have to deal with that kind of disrespect in their own neighborhood. This was just the beginning. What happened next would make it clear. Being the HOA president doesn't put you or your kid above the law. When you cross the line and get caught red-handed, there are consequences. And this time, they were coming fast. After discovering the graffiti all over my garage and confirming through security footage who was responsible, I knew I had to take action. This wasn't just an unfortunate incident. This was a deliberate act of vandalism carried out by none other than the teenage son of our neighborhood's self-declared HOA queen, Karen. The video footage left no room for doubt. There he was, can in hand, tagging my property without a care in the world. But what pushed it over the edge wasn't just the act itself. It was his smug behavior. He looked straight at the camera, smirked, and made no attempt to hide what he was doing. It was as if he truly believed he was untouchable. And why wouldn't he? After all, his mother controls the homeowners association and uses that position to bully and intimidate residents all the time. I caught up with the kid a few hours later when he was hanging out on the sidewalk with a group of his friends. I approached calmly, giving him the chance to say something. Anything. An apology, an explanation, even a nervous excuse. But what I got instead floored me. He laughed, literally laughed in my face. I asked him directly if he thought it was funny. To destroy someone else's property. His response? What are you going to do about it? My mom runs the HOA. She says you're a problem neighbor anyway. That line hit like a punch to the gut. It was clear that not only was he guilty of vandalizing my garage, but he also felt completely protected by his mother's position. It wasn't just arrogance, it was weaponized entitlement. This wasn't a kid who made a bad decision and felt remorse. This was someone raised to believe the rules didn't apply to him or his family, and unfortunately, I wasn't the first neighbor to experience this kind of behavior from them, but I was determined to be the last. I made it absolutely clear to him that being the HOA president's son did not give him immunity from the law. I told him I had full video evidence of the vandalism and that I would be taking it to the authorities. His smirk faltered for a moment, but he still tried to shrug it off. You can try, he said, but my mom can make things hard for you. She gets people fined all the time. That line said everything. This wasn't just a personal attack. It was a warning, a threat, one that reflected the kind of power trip his mother had been on for years. I realized in that moment that this situation wasn't just about paint on a garage. It was about standing up to an HOA dictatorship that had gone unchecked for too long. Neighbors had whispered about how Karen abused her HOA authority, sending warning letters for minor landscaping violations, threatening fines for perfectly reasonable decorations, and generally treating the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. But now, her son had taken that unchecked power and turned it into criminal behavior, and he felt safe doing it. I calmly walked away, documenting every part of the interaction. I knew I had the evidence, and I wasn't about to lose my cool. People like this thrive on drama, but I had the truth on my side. And more importantly, I had video proof of the vandalism, audio of the confrontation, and a clear record of the entitled attitude that backed it up. The fact that her son was so bold as to say, "My mom runs the HOA, you can't do anything," wasn't just a moment of bratty defiance. It was a symptom of a larger problem. When someone uses their position of power to shield their family from consequences, the entire community suffers. But this time, there would be consequences. Serious ones. After confronting Karen's son about spray painting my garage and hearing his bold claim that my mom runs the HOA, I knew I had to speak directly with her. Unfortunately, if you've ever dealt with a classic HOA Karen, you can probably guess how that conversation went. I approached her in a calm and respectful manner, hoping that at the very least she would acknowledge what her son had done and take responsibility. After all, there was undeniable video evidence, and her son didn't even try to deny it. But instead of addressing the issue like a responsible adult and homeowner, she chose the route of complete denial, deflection, and entitlement. When I explained the situation and let her know I had footage of her son vandalizing my property, she rolled her eyes and immediately shifted the blame onto me. She said, "He's just a teenager. They do dumb things sometimes. You should relax. It was just a harmless prank." That one sentence told me everything I needed to know. In her eyes, criminal property damage wasn't a serious matter. It was just a prank. She made it clear she had no intention of disciplining her son or taking accountability for what happened. In fact, she seemed more annoyed that I was making a big deal out of it. This kind of response is exactly what people mean when they talk about entitled parents. Instead of recognizing the severity of the situation and addressing it properly, she acted as if her position as the president of the HOA gave her and her son immunity from consequences. Her tone, her body language, and her words all conveyed one message. "You're wasting your time. I run this neighborhood." She even went a step further and turned the conversation into an attack on me. She said I had been difficult in the past and claimed I was always looking for trouble with HOA policies. This was her way of justifying the vandalism by painting me as the problem instead of dealing with her son's actions. What shocked me the most wasn't just her refusal to take responsibility. It was how she tried to use her HOA authority as a shield. She began threatening me with random HOA violations, implying she could make my life difficult if I pursued this any further. She casually mentioned that my trash bins had been out longer than the regulation time and that my lawn looked a bit uneven last week. Classic Karen tactics. Use her role not to serve the community, but to target anyone who stands up to her. It became painfully obvious that this wasn't just about a vandalized garage. This was a pattern of behavior. A power-hungry HOA president, using her position to protect her entitled child and silence anyone who questioned her rule. She had built a reputation in the neighborhood as someone you don't argue with, and now I understood why. But what she didn't expect was that I had already gathered overwhelming evidence. I had high-resolution video of her son committing the act, screenshots from the footage, and even a recording of his smug confession during our earlier confrontation. I wasn't going to let her gaslight the situation or bully me into silence. Dealing with an HOA Karen who abuses her authority is frustrating enough. But when that entitlement spills over into criminal acts, and those acts are dismissed as harmless jokes, it crosses a serious line. Property damage is not a prank, it's a crime. And trying to leverage your position in the HOA to shield your family from consequences is not just unethical, it's an abuse of power. While she may have believed she could control the narrative, I knew the truth would speak for itself. And unlike her, I wasn't afraid of a little noise. I was ready to take this as far as necessary to make sure justice was served, and that her family learned that being in charge of an HOA doesn't make you above the law. After enduring a dismissive and threatening conversation with the HOA president, aka Karen, who tried to downplay her son's vandalism as a harmless prank, I realized it was time to escalate things. When someone spray paints your garage and then mocks you with, "You can't do anything, my mom runs the HOA," it's not just about paint, it's about setting a precedent. No one, no matter who their parent is, should be allowed to destroy property and walk away without consequences. With security footage in hand and detailed photos of the damage, I filed a police report for vandalism. The officer who took the report was professional and immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. I showed them the video, where Karen's son could clearly be seen spray painting my garage with no attempt to conceal his identity. He even looked into the camera, smiling like he was proud of what he was doing. The officer shook his head and said, "This looks pretty clear-cut." I could tell from that moment that justice was already in motion. One of the strongest elements in this case was that it wasn't just hearsay or neighborhood gossip. It was hard video evidence of a criminal act, with a clear perpetrator and time-stamped footage. In the eyes of the law, this was criminal mischief and property damage, both punishable offenses. Karen's position in the HOA meant nothing in this context. Within a few days, law enforcement followed up. They reached out to Karen and her son for questioning. As expected, Karen initially tried to brush it off and protect her son by calling the entire situation blown out of proportion. But police don't operate based on HOA politics. They operate based on evidence. And the evidence was undeniable. Eventually, Karen's son was formally charged with vandalism. The officers let me know he had been arrested and that the case would move forward through the proper legal channels. Hearing that was incredibly validating. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability, and in this case, entitlement finally met reality. This outcome sent a strong message to the entire neighborhood. For too long, Karen had ruled the HOA with intimidation and unfair rule enforcement, but now her influence couldn't protect her from real-world consequences. You can fine people for their bushes being 2 inches too tall, but you can't talk your way out of a criminal investigation. The arrest shook the carefully constructed image Karen had built as the all-powerful HOA figure. Neighbors started talking. Some even thanked me quietly, saying they'd had similar experiences of being unfairly targeted by Karen and her family. The illusion of control and fear she had maintained was now crumbling. And the best part? I didn't need to stoop to her, level, or engage in a petty feud. I stayed calm, followed the law, and let the truth do all the work. The justice system took care of the rest. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that entitlement has limits, especially when it's backed only by perceived power, not real accountability. Just because someone holds a position in the HOA doesn't mean they are above the law. And just because someone thinks they can bully others with threats and status doesn't mean they won't face consequences when they cross the line. The arrest and charges brought against Karen's son didn't just bring justice for me. They reminded the entire community that there are boundaries, and when they're crossed, there are real, legal consequences. This was a wake-up call, not just for the HOA president, but for every entitled individual who believes power equals immunity. Once the dust settled and the legal process began, the entire neighborhood began to feel the ripple effects of what happened. The arrest of Karen's son for spray painting my garage didn't just resolve a personal issue, it exposed the deeper dysfunction and entitlement rooted in our HOA's leadership. And most importantly, it proved that power doesn't override the law. The first major shift was the reaction from neighbors. People who had been silent for years suddenly found the courage to speak up. Many came to me privately and said they had dealt with unfair HOA citations, passive-aggressive letters, and subtle intimidation from Karen for the smallest infractions, overgrown hedges, minor fence repairs, or even seasonal decorations that violated community standards. The illusion of her control began to fall apart because the myth of her invincibility was finally broken. Karen had built her power on fear and manipulation. She used her position as HOA president not to improve the neighborhood, but to push her personal agenda. However, once her son was formally charged with vandalism, her credibility took a massive hit. People who once stayed quiet about her overreach started to question her decisions, her motives, and her overall leadership. Her response to the situation only made things worse. Instead of showing humility or regret, she doubled down. She claimed I had turned the neighborhood against her and insisted the whole situation had been blown out of proportion. But by that point, no one was buying it. The facts spoke for themselves. There was video evidence, police involvement, and formal charges. No amount of HOA authority could spin that. What followed next was a series of formal complaints filed against her leadership. Multiple homeowners banded together to demand a vote of no confidence, challenging her position as HOA president. Her misuse of power, coupled with her poor handling of her son's criminal behavior, became the final straw for many residents who had suffered in silence for too long. As for the garage itself, I managed to get it professionally cleaned, and the vandalism was fully documented for both the police and my homeowner's insurance. The entire incident was not only covered, but the evidence I had helped expedite the claim. It was a small victory, but an important one. Justice wasn't just legal, it was restorative. Karen's son, now with a criminal record, was forced to complete community service and attend mandatory counseling as part of the outcome. While that doesn't erase the damage he caused, it does mark the beginning of some accountability. Hopefully, it also serves as a lesson about the real-world consequences of unchecked entitlement. More importantly, the situation empowered the community to reclaim control from toxic leadership. An emergency HOA meeting was called, where residents voiced their concerns and shared personal stories of Karen's abuses. It became clear that this wasn't an isolated issue. Her authoritarian rule had affected almost everyone in some way. Eventually, Karen was pressured to resign. While she tried to paint herself as a victim, the overwhelming majority voted for change. The neighborhood finally had a chance to rebuild, not just physically, but socially. It brought people together. A sense of fairness and transparency started. To return to the HOA, what started as one act of vandalism turned into a much larger conversation about power, privilege, and accountability. It was never just about spray paint on a garage door. It was about sending a message. No one, no matter their title or connections, is above the law. If you're dealing with an HOA Karen or any kind of entitled neighbor drama, remember this. Documentation is powerful, truth matters, and when you're in the right, standing up for yourself can lead to real change, not just for you, but for your entire community. If you enjoyed this story and want more real-life showdowns with entitled neighbors, subscribe to Expose HOA Karen for weekly uploads. Don't forget to like, comment, and share. Your support helps expose the truth.